All right, everyone. Hello, and welcome to my channel. This channel is for educational purposes, and we look at great theories of everything, ancient and modern, and try to flesh them out and figure out how to use them in the best way to work on your paradigm shifting, your awakening to 5D consciousness, and or your formation of a holistic worldview. Today is our 546th video that we've done on the reciprocal system of theory from Dewey Bernard Larson. And Mr. Larson lived in the 20th century, died in 1990, and he put out a lot of books on physics and chemistry and astronomy, but he's also got a book on metaphysics, which has sections on philosophy, religion, and psychology, biology. Some of his associates have written books, written articles or books on meteorology, geology, conspiracy theory. And Larson also has 2 books on economics. And we are looking at one of those books today called The Road to Permanent Prosperity. We just are getting ready to wrap up Chapter 11 on production and then move into Chapter 12. Now, Larson is not the first, but the first successful scientist to put forward a theory, cosmologist, put forward a theory, of a universe made out of motion. People like Thomas Hobbes and Rene Descartes had attempted that way back in the day, but Larson made it work, I think, because he was able to define motion as the relationship between space and time. Larson's first postulate says that the universe is composed entirely of one component, motion, existing in 3 dimensions, in discrete units, and with 2 reciprocal aspects, space and time. You can see that in speed. I was running at 10 miles per hour, 10 miles of space in 1 hour of time, space over time. But Larson spreads that out and applies it to all our basic scientific quantities. They are all fractions with space or time as the numerator and time or space as the denominator. But time or space can both have multiple exponents. So you can have, time to the 2nd power, or 3rd power, or even 4th, 5th, or 6th power. And Larson then came up with his 2 fundamental postulates, and then he derived a theoretical universe from those, and then compared his theoretical universe, the universe that would exist if his postulates were correct, and compared that with the empirical universe of the modern scientists that they have compiled in their scientific tables and such like. He did that especially in his works on chemistry and astronomy. And for his economic work, he uses the same principles and goes back to first principles. So he opposes the approach, the sociological approach to economics, which is, that you're attempting to propagate your particular philosophical viewpoint, whether it is equality or justice or feeding the poor or stamping out crony capitalism or something like that. Larson says that first you have to deal with the actual facts, the economic mechanism and the economic system, and he likened it to building a bridge or a house, that you have to comply with the laws of physics first, and then you can worry about the policy decisions later. So we've got to break down economics to its scientific components. He does that to start a lot through Robinson Crusoe economics, economics isolated to a one person on a deserted island, and then gradually moves into more complicated situations, first by introducing barter, then introducing money, and then introducing employees who are not involved in, both stages of the economic equation, which are production and consumption. So in physics, you have, time and space. In economics, you have production and consumption. And the products of the goods are the products of production, but goods are also what are consumed. They are, when they are produced, they're what he calls purchasing power, and when they're consumed, they're called goods. Okay, and he then introduces several principles which he says are and equations which are exact, scientifically exact, and leads to many conclusions that you probably wouldn't have guessed, that things like supply and demand are irrelevant. Things like you can't, the money supply is also irrelevant to, the functioning of an economy, and makes a number of different prescriptions later on in the book about what to do about the economic system. Okay, we're going to take over here at the end of chapter 11, just the last couple pages, and then move into chapter 12. So if you want to get a more detailed description of the reciprocal system in general, go back and watch one of my first 474 videos on this subject. If you would like to get to the beginning of this book and start from there, go back about 3 or 4 weeks in the archives, and we'll move through, starting with chapter 1, the road to permanent prosperity. Okay. As long as such a balance exists, a general increase in wages or in business taxes will have no adverse effect on business enterprises. Market prices will rise enough to absorb the increase in money purchasing power. The increase will pass on to the producers, who will then be back in the same relative position as before the cost increases. The price increase is inevitable and inescapable. It will take place regardless of what business enterprises want to do about it, even if they try to hold it back. The reverse is also true, as experience during depressions has demonstrated. The producers cannot keep the market from adjusting itself to a falling purchasing power flow. If they keep their prices up in defiance of a falling market trend, they cannot sell their goods. If they hold their prices down in defiance of a rising market trend, they merely raise the prices of other goods, for the general average of prices is fixed by the relation of the money entering the markets to the goods production volume. Efficient operation of the economic system to attain the results that we want is not the complicated and difficult task that we have been led to believe. It is difficult for those who want to reform the system to conform with their own ideas. But if we address ourselves to the specific task of eliminating the cycle of booms and depressions and leave the reforms to the reformers, There are no serious obstacles in our path. Later in this volume, it will be demonstrated that there are many practical methods of accomplishing the stabilization of the money reservoirs that is the primary requisite for permanent prosperity. These measures do not involve alteration of our economic institutions or reconstruction of our people. They merely provide the means whereby intelligent control can be applied to the system that is now in operation. Okay, that's the end of chapter 11 on production. Chapter 12 is called Money Inflation. Now, what Larson's outlining there is his road to permanent prosperity. It all has to do with the money, with the reservoirs, the banks, the places for storage, and boom and bust are related to withdrawals or deposits into those reservoirs. And so in the rest of this book, he comes up with various ideas for stimulating or regulating or balancing the flow of money to or from the reservoirs. And that is what keeps the economy on an even keel. And those things can be done unobtrusively. And, he explains those basic things to the rest of this book. Okay, chapter 12, Money Inflation. Quote, the unsolved problems of the affluent society, says Galbraith, are 1, the process of consumer demand creation and its financing, and 2, inflation. The solution to the first of these problems, he tells us, is, quote, or at least one part of it, is to have a reasonably satisfactory substitute for production as a source of income. End quote. Here is an idea that certainly deserves some kind of a medal as a prime example of economic absurdity. Real income, all economists admit, can be measured only in goods. That is, money or money substitutes constitute income only to the extent that they can be exchanged for goods. What Galbraith is telling us, then, is that the answer to our problem is to devise some way of getting goods without producing them, some kind of magic. But he does not stand alone. He has plenty of distinguished company. The happy hunting ground of the something-for-nothing enthusiast, the individual who refuses to recognize the conservation laws, has always been the field of economics. Here there is an unbroken line of succession from the John Laws of one era to the Francis Townsends of another, and it is hard to find an economic fallacy of any description that cannot command the support of at least one of 2 economists of the front rank. Thus we find the thoroughly discredited, quote, automatically depreciating money, or, quote, self-liquidating scrip, endorsed by both Keynes and Irving Fisher, the social credit program approved by Joan Robinson, and the performance of useless work as a means of enriching the community advocated by both Beveridge and Keynes, and more recently by Murdoch. Mrs. Robinson's comment on the proposed social dividend is particularly revealing. Quote, to conventional minds, she says, this scheme seems altogether too fantastic to be taken seriously, but all the same it recommends itself to common sense. If there is unemployment on the one hand and unsatisfied needs on the other, why should not the two be brought together by the simple device of providing the needy with purchasing power to consume the products of the unemployed. End quote. Here's a typical example of the logic of the present-day socially oriented economic reasoning. The objective of this proposal is unquestionably praiseworthy. Hence, let us forthwith proceed to adopt it without further ado. The first question that the scientists asks in such a situation is, can it be done? Is there a simple device by means of which we can supply the needy with purchasing power? Gets no consideration from the economist who has his eyes on the commendable objective. To him, it is the kind of a problem that is solved merely by persuading the community to arrive at a decision to take action. He does not bother to follow the dividend back to its source to determine where the purchasing power is coming from. So far as he is concerned, it just materializes out of thin air. As Schumpeter explains, quote, it is always a question, not of transforming purchasing power which already exists in someone's possession, but of the creation of new purchasing power out of nothing, end quote. It is particularly strange that the economist who recognizes so clearly that the only true measure of wages is the amount of goods that they will buy, and has coined the expressive term real wages to designate this quantity, should be unable to see that the same principle applies to all entities that are measured in terms of money, regardless of whether it happens to be in the form of money wage payments, money obtained from some other source, or some substitute for money. A quantity of money purchasing power is simply a claim against the goods produced, and it stands to reason that the more such claims that are issued against the same quantity of production, the less each one is worth in terms of real purchasing power. The suppliers of labor and capital services receive as payment claims against the total production of the community equal to the total value of the production. If any additional claims of any kind are issued by providing purchasing power in some other way, as advocated by Galbraith, Keynes, Robinson, Murdahl, etc., the effect is simply to decrease the value of the original claims. All that is accomplished by such measures is to divert goods from those who would normally receive them as payments for their productive activities into the hands of other individuals who have contributed nothing toward production. This is not necessarily an argument against such a diversion. There is much to be said in favor of subsidizing those who are involuntarily unemployed, those who are physically handicapped, etc., at the expense of those who are regularly receiving payments for productive services. But such subsidies should be recognized for what they are and should be handled accordingly, not presented in the guise of measures to aid the economy in general. All such diversions of purchasing power from one group to another are transactions at the same economic location. As stated in Principle 4, such transactions have no effect on production in general or marketing in general. They do not enrich the community. They merely help some groups at the expense of others. The synthetic purchasing power which well-meaning but visionary individuals propose to distribute so freely in the form of social dividends or other handouts to those who have done nothing to earn them, specifically condemns, quote, the Puritan principle that leisure should be less amply rewarded than work could be obtained by taxation. But this is not popular among the supporters of the measures, as it then becomes too painfully obvious that these programs merely rob Peter to pay Paul. What the socio-economic economist tries to do is to devise the economic equivalent of a perpetual motion machine, a scheme which will create something, purchasing power in this case, out of nothing. But the basic laws of economics are no more subject to evasion than the corresponding laws of physics. Purchasing power cannot be created except by production. All that these something-for-nothing schemes ever produce is more money. And this merely dilutes the value of the existing money. It does not add anything to real purchasing power. A failure to distinguish between money and purchasing power is one of the great weaknesses in modern economic theory. This lack of differentiation not only opens the door to a weird assortment of something-for-nothing schemes of the type just discussed, but even more significantly, it prevents the economist from seeing the solid and stable relationships that do exist in the economic field, those that constitute the basis for the theoretical developments in this work. For example, it is this confusion between money and purchasing power that is responsible for Samuelson's previously quoted statement that there is no economic law to prevent the creation of purchasing power. He can see that money can be created out of nothing, and that this money can be used as purchasing power. Hence, he concludes that purchasing power has been created. What he fails to recognize is that the total amount of purchasing power, the ability to buy goods, that was previously in existence has not been altered by the addition of more money. This money is circulating purchasing power, to be sure, but as money, it is measured in dollars or their equivalent. As purchasing power, it is measured in terms of ability to buy goods. In terms of dollars, the circulating stream has been increased, but in terms of purchasing power, it remains unchanged. The issuance of more money has not created purchasing power. It is merely a device whereby purchasing power can be diverted from those who now possess it to others who will presumably use it in a manner meeting the approval of those who control the diversion. If the government issues more currency, it is able to buy goods therewith. But the ability of the recipients of normal income, wages, etc., to buy goods is decreased proportionally. This fact is generally recognized in the case of severe currency inflation, as it has been demonstrated over and over again in actual practice, but it should be realized that this is a general principle which applies to all money inflation, including that resulting from banking transactions. New credit money issued by the banks has buying power only to the extent that the buying power of current income from other sources is decreased. The new currency increases money purchasing power, but it does not alter the real purchasing power, ability to buy goods. The buying power of the new money is attained only by reducing the buying power of the money received as compensation by the workers and the owners of capital, which is principle 15. But I think we skipped a couple principles there, but so hopefully you'll go back to that. Any program that puts purchasing power into the hands of individuals other than those who supplied the means whereby it was produced takes this purchasing power away from other individuals, usually the general public. If the diversion is not accomplished directly by taxation, it is accomplished just as surely by inflation. The net result of the futile attempts to solve Galbraith's problem number 1 is therefore to push us into the jaws of his problem number 2. Inflation is the reaction of the economic mechanism to man's attempts to get something for nothing. It is the way in which the economic system enforces payment when the members of the human race try to avoid paying the costs of their actions. Efforts to find a substitute for production as a source of income are attempts to get something for nothing, and if such schemes are put into operation, the result is inflation. Efforts to increase purchasing power by subsidizing special groups are attempts to get something for nothing, and they lead to inflation. Efforts to avoid high taxes by printing money with which to meet governmental expenses are attempts to get something for nothing, and they cause inflation. Efforts to improve the status of the working population by raising the level of money wages or reducing the hours of work without cutting wages are likewise attempts to get something for nothing, and they cause inflation. Efforts to attain prosperity by cutting taxes while government expenditures are maintained or even increased are attempts to get something for nothing, and these too cause inflation. Something for nothing is prohibited by a law that we cannot evade, and no matter how ingenious the attempt at evasion may be, the end result is always inflation, which means that the general public has to pay the bill. General inability or unwillingness to recognize the real meaning of inflation is the cause of most of the confusion which now reigns in this area of economic thought, a confusion which led the authors of a 1963 survey of inflation theory to describe their work in these words, quote, "Our survey is accordingly more of a guide through chaos than a history of revealed doctrine or a systematic critique of a few rival positions," end quote. In this atmosphere of chaos that now surrounds the subject of the various investigators are not even able to agree as to just what they are talking about when they speak of inflation. The authors of the survey just mentioned make this comment, quote, "Indeed, disagreement over the definition of the term is symptomatic of the confusion in inflation theory. Our first concern, therefore, will be to define the concepts with which we will be dealing. We begin by defining inflation in general. Inflation is an increase in the general market price level. This defines inflation in terms of its effect, which is the primary concern of the victim, the consumer who has to pay the higher price. For purposes of analysis, we are interested in the relation between the causes of inflation and that effect. From the points brought out in the discussion in chapters 10 and 11, it is clear that the effects of a price level increase originating in the production market are quite different from those of an increase originating in the goods market, and we will therefore want to distinguish between the two. The most common cause of price increases in the production market is an increase in wage rates. But several other factors, such as increased business taxes or lagging productivity that increase the cost of production, have the same effect. We will therefore use the term cost inflation for this kind of an increase in the price level. Cost inflation is an increase in the general price level originating in the production market. No fully satisfactory term is available for the price level increase originating in the goods market, but since its cause is a net withdrawal from the money reservoirs, which increase the flow of money purchasing power in the circulating stream, we may call it a money inflation. Money inflation is an increase in the general market price level due to an addition to the money flow in the circulating stream from the money stored in the reservoirs. The terms demand inflation or demand-induced inflation are quite commonly used in present-day economic literature, with the same general significance that has been given to money inflation in the foregoing definition. But since we find it necessary to take some exceptions to the economist's conception of the relation between demand and inflation, it has seemed advisable to use a different term. Another terminology that is used to some extent refers to seller's inflation and buyer's inflation, which correspond roughly to cost inflation and money inflation, respectively. Although inflation is ordinarily regarded as an increase in goods prices, it would be equally correct to consider it a decrease in the value of money. What it actually does is to change the relation between the two, and the question as to which one is altered is merely a matter of which we take as our reference point. The usual practice is to call it a price change because money is utilized as a standard of value for economic purposes, and we therefore tend to regard money as the fixed element and price as the variable element in market transactions. However, if the conditions are such that the buying power of the local currency can be compared with that of gold or some currency enjoying more general acceptance, we then recognize variations in the relative buying power as compared to that of these more stable forms of money as being evidence of changes in the value of the local currency rather than price changes. Minor changes of this kind are accepted as no more than fluctuations in the currency exchange rate, but a significant drop in value is known as currency inflation, since this kind of a value collapse almost always results from financing government expenditures by printing currency rather than by taxation. Technically, it is simply a severe money inflation. Okay, that is about all the time we have for today, and we will resume Chapter 12 on money inflation when we start tomorrow. Hopefully, I bit my tongue, and my tongue is swollen, and certain words just trigger it, and it kind of hurts, but it also affects my pronunciation. So hopefully my swelling will be down by tomorrow, and I'll be able to talk normally again. But thanks for tuning in today, and